Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight or today, depending on where you are in the world. I'm delighted to be on this introductory call with you. This is a new course that we're going to be running through the Montessori Notebook. It's a 6-week program aimed for 0 to 3 families, so parents or carers of 0 to 3-year-olds, or people who want to maybe one day work with 0 to 3-year-olds. And I'm delighted that I got to ask Zoe Paul to run this course for us. And so to get to know her and to learn more about the 0 to 3 child, I'm going to just hand it over straight away to Zoe and enjoy this little introductory call. Also, just to give you a quick heads up, this will run for about 45 minutes, the little presentation that Zoe is going to give. Then we'll break, and at the very end of the call, there'll be time for some Q&A. So the call will take about an hour of your time, and I hope you enjoy it. So over to you, Zoe.
Okay. Well, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Zoe Paul. I'm originally from Nigeria, but grew up in the States and in Europe. I am an AMI-trained 0 to 6 teacher, and I'm also an AMI auxiliary trainer for ages birth to 3. I normally work out of Paris when I'm giving AMI trainings. But I live and work in San Francisco, California, where I have a little school called Studio Montessori. It's a bilingual French-English program for children 3 months all the way to about 5, 6 years old. It's a real pleasure to be with you. And I hope this whets your interest in all things 0 to 3. This course is really for those looking for ways to support children in being as independent as possible. And the course is going to focus on 5 axes of independence that I'm going to introduce you to today. And those axes of independence are things like emotional independence, intellectual independence, physical independence, and so on and so forth. This information is going to be really helpful for those of you with children at home, 0 to 3. But I think even for those of you with teenagers, I think, in the Montessori context, we consider 0 to 3 and early teenagehood, so puberty, 12 to 15 as being parallel planes of development. That's to say that we find very similar psychological profiles. And so, although this course is more specific to 0 to 3, I think you'll find it helpful, even foundational to understanding uh, your teenagers, if you have any, or work with any, because from the Montessori perspective, like I said, they are parallel planes. There are a lot of similarities that we have to take into consideration to provide them the right context and environment for their development. So we're going to talk today just a little bit about the spiritual embryo. Okay, this is a very Montessori concept. We don't find it's quite unique to Montessori. We don't find it from in many other areas or philosophies. But I think it's important to address and just give you some foundational knowledge. One, because this is a deep dive, right? We're going to do more than just give you a few hints and hacks to practice at home, right? Because at the end of the day, childhood is not hackable, right? There might be a little, thing here or there that might change your approach and help you. But we're talking about human beings, right? Every human being is unique with their own special background, their own mentality, their own way of seeing the world, and we can't parenting and education can't be about hacking our way through that. We have to understand the child. We have to understand what Montessori termed the laws of development, right? And when you think of like a plant, right, a lot of us understand the laws of development of a plant. Most plants need water, they need soil, they need They need good air, they need sunlight, and we have an understanding of what effect not having those key things due to their development, right? So we could say like the law of water, right? Water is necessary for most plants to develop healthily, right? We know we have a visceral understanding of the role of the sun, right? That through photosynthesis, uh, these um, these plants are able to grow on a cellular basis. But a lot of us don't take time to learn about the laws of human development, right? And Montessori had several that were important. One is, you probably know, is the law of the absorbent mind, and that's the child from 0 to 6 has an absorbent mind, and that they're not thinking in the way that they approach the world, right? They're absorbing the world, and so the more that we feed their senses, feed them elements of the environment that they can absorb, the more healthily they're going to grow, rather than us just lecturing them and talking to them, etc. Right? And so I'm going to introduce you to the law of the spiritual embryo because it is foundational to understanding independence, right? Because you have to have an understanding of who this child is from birth to 3 years old. So if you'll allow me a second to just share my screen with you, right there, the presentation I've made for you guys. We're not going to rate this app right now. Okay. So the spiritual embryo. All right. Let's talk about it. Here's a quote from Maria Montessori in The Absorbent Mind. She says here that it follows that the newborn child has to do a piece of formative work, which corresponds in the psychological sphere to the one just done by the embryo in the physical sphere. Before him, there is a period of life different from that which he led in the womb, yet still unlike that of the man he is to become. The postnatal work is a constructive activity which is carried on in what may be called the formative period, and it makes the baby into a kind of spiritual embryo. Okay. And so I know this is dense, but like I said, this is a deep dive, so we're going to go a little deeper than we normally do, right? When we approach all things Montessori. And so first we notice that Montessori doesn't see the newborn as entirely helpless or what would be the word? Entirely unprepared for the world that that he has entered into, right? This child, a newborn, already, she says, has a piece of formative work to do, right? And that means he has a purpose, he has a job, right? And so it behooves us to learn more about the work of this child, the work that he did prior to being born, and the work that he needs to do as he grows. And she says that the work that this child is going to be doing as a newborn corresponds in the psychological sphere to what was done by the embryo in this physical sphere, right? And so when you think about the embryo inside the womb, right? This little packet of life, right? That eventually, starts off as one cell, then divides into two, divides exponentially, right? And then eventually forms an embryo, right? And what is in that embryo? That embryo has basically all the organs, it's developing all the organs that are going to be necessary for its life outside of the womb, right? A child without a functioning respiratory system isn't going to survive, right? A child without a functioning circulatory system. So all those organs need to form at some time, at some point, and then start to work together, right? And so that's the work of the embryo. And Montessori is saying that the newborn has a similar type of work to do psychologically. So she's acknowledging that from our perspective, not much might be there, right? This child doesn't have language, right? Can't speak, can't talk, is learning to move, unable to really eat for himself. And so, psychologically, in a certain sense, the newborn is inert. But it doesn't end there. That inertness, right, is full of potential, right? Just the same way the cells that form into the embryo have potential. And just the same way the embryo has to create the organs necessary for life outside the womb, the spiritual embryo, this child from birth to about 2.5 years old, has to create their mental organs, their own personality, their ability to think, right? Um, and this period in this child's life is going to be different from what he had in the womb, where everything was provided for him, right? The womb is the perfect environment for developing embryo, developing fetus. That the womb is it's elastic, it's responsive, right? It responds on a second by second, minute by minute level. To the actual needs of that baby at that time in the womb. Um, but that's not how it is on the outside, right? The environment is very, very different. So it's going to be a different life that this child has to adapt to and to exist in, right? But this postnatal work, and again, Montessori sees this child as capable, someone who has a job to do and is equipped to do it. This postnatal work, she says, is a constructive activity, and it's formative, right? So just like the physical embryo is forming its organs for digestion, for breathing, for blood circulation, etc., the spiritual embryo is forming its mental organs. Okay, and as she says, this makes the baby into a kind of spiritual embryo. Okay, someone who is creating himself. Right. So, what are these mental organs that this newborn has to create? Well, think about what makes you a human being. What makes human beings human? One, our movement profile. How we coordinate our movements is part of what makes us human. And just think about who you would be if you were not able to move, right? You're not able to correspond with your environment as fully as you might, right? Movement is essential. It's actually part of who you are as a person, right? I'm sure you probably had in the middle of the night a child or in the dark, someone walk up to you, but you already knew who that person was, not because you could see who they were, but by the way they move, right? In much of Africa, where I was born, we knowing how human beings move as opposed to how animals move is essential for survival, right? That person or that thing coming across the horizon, if it moves a certain way, you know, oh, that's probably a dangerous animal. I need to move, get out of its way. But if it's upright and it's walking as if it's bipedal, it's probably a human being, and it's a different response that's necessary, right? And Montessori, above all the other mental, psychological organs that we create that she talks about, movement to her was actually one of the most important. Without movement and allowing children the freedom to move, um, as they needed to, as they desired to, in the environments she set up, we wouldn't have had the discovery that is now known as the Montessori method, right? She says here in this quote, in our schools, we see that all children have a natural urge to perfect their movements, such as achieving equilibrium with exercises of practical work. From this, we have seen that all development of movement must be related to some intelligent purpose, right? And so we know that as we want to support children, these youngest members of humanity and society, that we have to give them the possibility of developing their mental organ of movement, of coordinating their movements, so that that they are able to interact with the world. They're able to navigate this world around them. Another psychological organ that has to be developed is language. Again, think about who you are. What are you without language? Language makes it possible for you to express yourself, as Montessori says here in this quote, language was invented to enable one to express the work of the intellect. I love this quote. So we know that language is to help us express our thoughts, express what we're thinking, what we're feeling. But language also makes it possible for us to understand the expressions of others. And we're not born with it. We're not born with language, right? A child who is born, even if they're born to parents of who are Chinese speaking, of Chinese descent, you put that same child born to a Chinese family in another culture, he's going to learn the language of that culture, right? Showing that he's not born with this. He's born with the potential for language, but not with a specific language. And so this is another aspect of the personality of the human being, of the individual, that needs to be developed and nurtured, right? And so we'll be talking in the upcoming course about what is linguistic independence? What does that mean? Right? And how do we support that so that the child is able to develop his own person? Okay. Another aspect, another organ, mental organ that has to be created is the intellect, our ability to think. Montessori says here is that intelligence is what distinguishes man from animals, and the building up of his intelligence is the first thing to occur. Everything else waits upon this. That means the second that the child is born, intelligence is being activated and is growing. The child begins to know and to know more, and that desire for knowledge, that desire to develop his intellect is insatiable, right? We see it in the child recognizing, right? That recognition of his mother's scent, of milk, of everything in his environment. All that points to an intelligence and an understanding of the world around them. When the breast or a bottle is put in front of this child and he opens his mouth, intellect is engaged, right? He recognizes what he sees, he understands what it means, and acts and moves accordingly, right? And so the intellect of someone, of any given person, is something that needs to be developed and nurtured as something that is a part of that person's personality, right? Intellect is not something that we're going to give to children, right? It's something that they're born with, and through their interactions with the environment, they begin to develop a very unique and deep scientific understanding of the world around them. Okay, then their emotions, all right? It's interesting where we are in our scientific understanding of emotions. Uh, and what we're learning is that we're not born with emotions in the way that we think. Emotions are a system within us that have to be developed. They have to be nurtured, right? And the human being has to know how to use them for his own benefit and good. Montessori says here that we must give him the means and encourage him. Courage, my dear, courage. You are a new man that must adapt to this new world. Go on triumphantly. I am here to help you. And then she goes on to say that this kind of encouragement is instinctive in those who love children. And what she's basically getting at here is that we want to encourage and create a context for children where emotionally they are so stable so confident in themselves and their own abilities that they feel that they're able to tackle just about anything. That with the right level of work, the right level of understanding, the right emotional state, they're going to be able to go through this world triumphantly. I love the way that she says that. Uh, One of the things to keep in mind, especially I think in our current context in the world, is that because we're talking about the law of the spiritual embryo, that these are the basic building blocks, the basic systems that exist in every human being. That's a law unto itself, and so we don't get to pick and choose. Break we can't break one law aspect of the law and expect things to turn out well, right? And so just like with the plant, you can provide all the right type of water, the right soil, you know, pure air. But if there's no sunlight, we're going to have a problem, right? These things have to be available to the child, to the plant, and supported in the correct measures. And it's the same here. We can't give more importance to emotions than we give to language, than we give to others. They all form the part of a whole person, right? And so when we discuss social emotional development, we're going to discuss the latest, most scientific definitions of emotions, right? And what it means to support that this new understanding of emotions. And I guess as a teaser, I can explain that our emotions are basically a report of how we're feeling, as well as a report of our physical state, right? And so there are the feelings, happy, sad, angry, etc. But there's also your physical state because we talk about how some people get hangry, right? When they're hungry, they act hungry. They get pretty angry and cranky. And that tells us that our feelings are very much tied to our emotional state. And so being able to understand our emotions is having to understand these two aspects, the physical and the psychological, our feelings, how they interplay with each other, and using that two-part report to guide how we interact with the world and what our next steps will be. So I love talking about social emotional development within the Montessori context because we really see how we really have the power to shape children's emotions in such a way to provide them the tools they need to create an understanding of their own emotional state where they're really able to go out into the world and do things we've never seen before, right? Then finally, there's the will, right? Montessori says that by means of these experiences, and the experiences she's talking about, these experiences within the environment that are designed to to feed the five mental organs that we are discussing here, the child and these exercises, the child's movements become coordinated, and finally his will can use them for its purposes. And that's really what we're after, right? As we're raising children, as we're educating them, that they're able, through their own will, to control their bodies, to manipulate their environment for their own purposes, not for our own, right? Not for other people's, but for themselves. We're really after supporting children becoming their own individual human being and embodying that to its fullest, not embodying our personalities, our fears, our joys, etc., but their own, and being able to use their will for their own purposes. There's a philosopher, I can't remember the name right now, who says that the most unique thing about human beings isn't even language, it's actually the will. that we have the power to choose how we're going to manipulate the world around us, our own feelings for our own purposes. And when you think about it, I think there's a real measure of truth there. That child who knows that, oh, I'm hungry right now. Mom and dad aren't available, but I have the tools within myself, my own hands, my own body. I have an understanding of the world around me, right? That I can go into the fridge and prepare my own meal. I can satisfy my own needs for my own purposes. Now, that's a powerful child, right? And we can help support that development in this tiny window called the spiritual embryo from 0 to about 2.5 years old. In fact, it's so important, Montessori said, that if these things aren't embedded a part of the child's personality by the time they turn 3, we've got serious work to do from ages 3 to 6. And that's what necessitates the need for normalization, right? Helping this child to discover their own true normal state, to be concentrated, to be able to learn, etc. So these things are all really foundational, even your child's ability, will. And I know, a lot of, we're all on social media, right? And so will often gets boiled down, simplified to choice, right? And so, you're often told if you're entering into power struggles with your child about what to wear or what to eat, give them two choices, right? But will is much more refined than that, right? You can offer a child the choice of wearing a t-shirt or choice of wearing, a short sleeve shirt or a long shirt. That's choice, right? Will is deeper because it has to do with purpose. It has to do with the understanding of the following consequences, right? So if it's cold outside, right, below 0, offering the child a choice between wearing one coat or the other isn't doing anything for helping them to develop their will. There's a whole context of understanding that it's cold outside. If you wear this particular coat, it's more adapted to the type of weather that we have outside, and you will feel better within yourself because of it, as opposed to wearing maybe a raincoat, which will only protect you from any precipitation, but it's not necessarily going to keep you warm, right? And if you make the choice to wear the coat in this below zero weather, there are consequences that you're going to feel cold. You might be uncomfortable. You might get sick, right? These kind of things. And so when we talk about the development of the will, and how to support that development. We're going to be working from it from that angle, not just offering two basic choices, but helping the child to understand the consequences of their choices. And then as they get older, understanding that consequences of their choices, they're able to own responsibility for their choices, right? And we do that as adults, right? Yeah, it's cold outside, but I'm going to wear my rain jacket because I know it's going to rain later, but it's also going to get warmer, right? And so I can own the fact that for temporarily, I'm going to be cold, but I've made an intelligent decision based on my will, not just two choices that were presented to me, right? And so these are the type of things that we're going to be talking about in our deep dive into independence. Now, why are these 5 organs that I've discussed, mental organs that I've discussed with you, so important? Why is it so foundational to understand the spiritual embryo? Well, basically, that quote that we had at the beginning from Montessori, this child has a work to do. This child has a purpose, and that purpose is to create himself, create his own personality. And he can't do that if he doesn't have language, if he doesn't have coordinated movement, if he doesn't have a will, if he doesn't have emotions. He doesn't have those 5 things working together under the control of his will. Really doesn't have we can't truly say he's developed his own personality, his own individuality. He will always be susceptible to the whims of a stronger personality, right? And so, what is the child's work? It's two-pronged from Montessori's perspective. It's about independence and it's about adaptation, right? And so, with independence, Montessori says here in this quote, little by little, as a child proceeds along this way, he will freely manifest himself, right? Not other people, not necessarily his family, culture, etc. He's going to manifest himself with greater clarity and truth, and thus reveal his proper nature, his own nature. This is why the first educational influence upon a child should have as its objective the guidance of the child along the way of independence, right? No one can be free if he is not independent. Therefore, in order to attain this independence, the active manifestations of personal liberty must be guided from the earliest infancy. Okay, I find this quote really powerful because it kind of gives us our template for how we are supposed to be working with children. That from earliest infancy, that's from birth, we're going to give them opportunities to be independent, to exercise their independence. So rather than just shoving the breast or shoving a bottle into a child's mouth, we're going to wait, right? We're going to present it and wait for the child to experience it, smell the breast, smell the bottle, smell the milk, right? And make that choice to open his mouth independently rather than just, you're hungry. Let me give you, let me give you a bottle to feed off of. Let me give you a breast, right? Independence can be nurtured from day one, right? And it's not a cold independence. You can do this by yourself, and therefore you always have to do it by yourself, and I'm not going to help you. There's a context of warmth. There's a context of, as we saw in the quote from Montessori about emotions. There is an encouragement, right? And so our engagement in a warm, gentle, loving context is really, really important so that when the time comes, the child has full confidence in their own ability to be independent. Because remember, the overall context is that this child will eventually move into a new plane of development from 6 to 12, eventually go through puberty, and then eventually become an adult, right? An adult who has to be responsible for himself and may have to be responsible for others, right? In the context of work or creating his own family, right? And to be able to do that, right, we have to nurture that independence from the earliest infancy so that his only memory of himself is his own ability to exercise his independence in a context of confidence, in a context of self-love and love from his family. Okay. The other prong of the child's work is adaptation, right? Montessori says here the first period of the child's life is one of adaptation. We must understand clearly what is meant by adaptation in this sense and distinguish it from the kind of adaptation made by adults. A grown up who lives abroad never adapts his life in the same way and to the same degree. But turn to the child. He comes to love the land in which he is born, no matter where it is. Each has received this adaptation, this love for a love of country from the child he used to be. Okay, we're going to shrink that down into the microcosm of the family, right? And so this child who comes into the world has to adapt to his family, right? He has to learn to love his family and to function within that family, right? And so another terminology we can use instead of adaptation, right, is belonging. This child has a work to do and he has to belong to his family, right? And for those of you who've had the experience of working with children who don't belong or don't feel they belong in their school or in their family context, you know how fundamental this is, how necessary it is for a child to feel that they belong, right? That they're here for their family and that their family is here for them, right? That they have a true foundation as they navigate this big wide world that they have to learn so much about. And so this is an important work of the child. The child has to adapt. They have to fit into a family context, a family life. And so when we talk about adaptation. We're not going to call it adaptation. We're going to be talking about it from the lens of preparing your home to be one that your child can adapt to, preparing that right environment. What we're talking about is helping the child to belong. And there's no way to belong, one, without these five mental organs we talked about, right? And so we know that for a child to belong, we have to talk to the child so that they can develop language and be able to talk to us, right? We have to have a warm, welcoming, loving, emotionally stable environment. Why? So that this child can develop stable, loving emotions for as he interacts with the world. We know this child needs to be given space so that he's able to move and coordinate his movements and create his own movement profile. All of these things help the child to belong. And then the capstone, of course, is going to be his will, right? And to engage the will of the child so that he belongs, the child has to have a role in the family, several roles, right? We have a child at my school right now who cries a lot, and we figured out that a lot of it is just because she doesn't have a role, and so we've created roles for her. And so when she comes in, we're like, are you sure you want to cry? You've got work to do. We need you to set the table for lunch, and we need you to make our smoothie. And right away, she stops crying because she's got work to do. She belongs. People are depending on her, right? And so that's where we see will engaged, so that this child's full personality, as it said here, manifests itself with greater and greater clarity, thus revealing his own true nature. You can't adapt if you're not given freedom, independence to adapt, right? And you can't be independent if you don't adapt. The two go hand in hand, and that's why I said that it's two pronged. This work that the child has to do. We have a role in all of that we're going to be discussing at each step of the way with each lecture that we give in the course. But just as a spotlight, the overall role that we have as adults, Montessori termed it our duty. Okay. Our duty is to learn from the child on the spot and to serve him as best we can, right? And so, what does that entail? It means we're going to have to do what we're doing now, a deeper dive, right? We're not going to hack our way through this. We're going to make sure we understand more of the psychology of the child, understand more of these laws of development that are so crucial. We need to understand that the child, the adult, and the environment are equal. They all work together for the best development of the child, which in turn will lead to the best development of humanity. We also have to prepare an environment, right? We said that the environment that the child lives in now is very different from what he had when he was in the womb, right? The womb was responsive, right? Adapting second by second. Our environments aren't responsive unless we, the adults, are responsive, right? Actively making the changes that are needed, actively incorporating, adjusting, any manner of things. And when we talk about it, we'll talk about the fact that there's a physical environment, right? The beds that you buy, the activities that you make available to the child, the home that you have, etc. But there's also the human environment, right? What is the tone, the tenor of the adults and the other people within the home, within the school context, within society that this child is exposed to? The environment, both human and physical, have to be full of intelligent activities. It's intellect, right? We said that's the first thing that's being developed when this child enters into the world, an understanding. And so we want to make sure that we create an environment that is full of intelligent activities. And then we're going to have to link the child. It's not just enough to have a nice home, right? You do that and nothing more. It's just like you going to somebody's house and being a guest. They tell you to make yourself at home, but you don't know what that means. How do they live? How do they eat? You know? I've gone to many a home where they said, make yourself at home. And then I chose the wrong glass for drinking water out of. And they're like, no, it's a different cup you need to use, or you go to a different culture and they might drink out of a bowl, right? There are any number of things that show that even for us as adults, to be able to adapt, to feel independent, we have to be in contact with the environment in a deeper way, in a different way, right? And so in the Montessori context, we call that linking the child with the environment, showing them that they can touch, they can feel, they can manipulate, they can change the environment, right? That the environment responds to them. And that doesn't happen by just saying, go forth and explore. Do what you want to do, right? It happens by guiding the child to those key things that within the environment that are suited to where they are right now in their development. And then, of course, there's that continual preparation of ourselves, right? We want to be ready to support them at every stage of their development, from the spiritual embryo phase to the 3 to 6 absorbent mind, to childhood, 6 to 12, to adolescence, onto adulthood. And so that means that although we've created this 6-week course, the learning is ongoing, right? We're going to be coming back to Simone and to other people to help us with further learnings, so that we're always able to respond and help nourish these children at every stage of the development. Okay, and of course we can't forget about the role of the environment. That the environment has to have everything necessary to develop the 5 mental organs of the spiritual embryo, right? So we're looking at, is there language in your environment beyond books, right? Is there language in the environment? Are you talking to the child? Is the child allowed to talk to you? Are you talking with other people, right? There needs to be emotions in the environment, right? Is it a warm, welcoming, warm and fuzzy, gives you good vibes kind of place, so that the child begins to internalize the positivity that's in the environment. Movement. Does the environment allow for the child to move and coordinate his movements by himself? Or is the environment so tight, so small, so packed, so unsafe that you have to hold the child everywhere in the environment and they can't explore for themselves? They can't coordinate their own movements. And does the environment contain the necessary elements that allow for the development of the intellect and development of the will? What choices are available to the child, and what choices with consequences adapted to where the child is in their environment are available to the child, right? All of these things need to be taken into account as we prepare the environments, right? So as you get on social media and you look at different influencers shelfie of the week, you're going to be looking a little more deeply, right? You're going to be looking at, is what's on that shelf and what's in that entire room, does that respond to the development of the 5 essential key organs that this child is developing at this age? And if it's not, that you, as the responsible adult, the one with the power to change the environment, need to adapt the environment, reconfigure the environment for the child that's before you. Okay. The environments that we create have to respond to the needs and the sensitivities of the spiritual embryo. It also has to provide enough social experiences that produce a sense of belonging. And so if you want your child to belong to the family, the environment that you create has to have the family in it. The child can't feel excluded, right, at mealtime. I've had many families, it happens all the time. Every year, there's at least 4 or 5 when I talk to them about meal times, and they're like, oh, we eat at a table, and then our child has a separate table, Montessori style, for themselves. And I'm like, well, that's not what we're talking about, right? That doesn't develop a sense of belonging. The child, either you go to the child's table or the child eats at the table with you. That's what's going to help create a sense of belonging, right? And so we're going to be talking about those things, and then the environment has to be sufficiently stable, right? It has to be static. It can't be changing from moment to moment, day to day, right? So we want enough predictability, right, so that the child can really develop an understanding of how this environment works, both on the physical level and on the emotional level, right? And then, just as a warning, we'll talk more about this later in the course, but unnatural environments do not produce natural outcomes. And we know that if we follow the laws of development, just like if we follow the laws of development for a plant, that if we're providing the right amounts of water, soil, pure air, sunlight, that is going to, the natural outcome is a healthy plant that can reproduce other healthy plants. We know if we change those elements and put that same plant in an unnatural environment, we're not going to have the same outcomes, right? And it's very much the same thing with a child, right? And so we need to think about what are the unnatural elements that we're exposing children to that might be producing some unnatural outcomes. Uh, some of those unnatural elements that come to mind, unnatural environments, are excessive screen time, right? That's not natural, right? That you touch a screen and things happen and this light's popping up in their faces. Um, Pictures changing, every half second or less. That's not going to produce natural, normal intellectual development. An environment where nobody really speaks to the child, well, you're going to end up with a child who probably chooses not to speak, right? And so we'll talk more about that when we get to preparing the environment for independence, because it's an important thing to keep in mind that we want environments that follow the natural laws of development so that the child can reveal who he is, his own true personality, um, without the influence of these unnecessary things. So I hope that all made sense, and gives you a deeper underpinning of what we plan on talking about in our deep dive into independence.
Thank you so much, Zoe. For one, like I've studied so much Montessori and I still learn something every time I listen to you. And I like I love hearing from different people and learning from different people because you always take away something different. And one thing that I found so interesting, you used a word today that I love, which is belonging.
Mm.
Because when we don't feel like we belong, then we don't feel safe. We can't learn. There's a lot of science now that backs that up. To do with fight and flight and all those kind of things. And we do know that in Montessori, and that was part of Dr. Montessori's work. So I'm so excited that yeah, everyone who was here on the call tonight and maybe who will follow the deep dive 6-week training as well gets to have the opportunity to find out how they can create that belonging in their family and with other children that they know and understand that. That's really beautiful as well. But also, like these 5 axes of independence, yes. How can we actually act in the world if we can't move, if we can't manage our emotions, if we can't, those 5 things? I thought that was such a great way to look at it because sometimes we get caught up in this idea of independence, which is just like, oh, my child can dress themselves, or how do I get my child out the door? But actually, when you look at the big purpose of it, then it kind of like you ground it in a bigger feeling. I think for families, we're so rushed. And actually, you
Right.
gave the example of like instead of just feeding the baby, putting the bottle in their mouth or the breast, that kind of thing, actually to present it. And I was just like, oh, and actually, maybe that's a good question for you before we get into the Q&A, is for parents or carers who are on the call who think, that all sounds great, but I don't have the time. You must get that question all the time. What do you suggest? for families.
Yeah, well, I think that's the beauty of taking a course like this. You'll find that one, you actually always do have the time. It's the preparation that really makes the difference, right? And so this course really is designed to help prepare you with the knowledge necessary, so that when those moments come, you can manage them. Then there's also if you would permit me, the non-gentle, tough love part is that we have to make the time, right? You know, the more we're willing to make the time, the more we're going to find that children respond with a sense of belonging, with a sense of ease, with a sense of purpose, even. And I guess having taught for so long, I've kind of made my peace with the fact that an environment where there isn't a lot of time to sit down and show children how to do life is not a natural environment either, right?
Mm.
It's not natural what we're experiencing. Parents have never been busier with
Mhm.
things outside the home, with work, making money, repairs, etc., than they are now. And my hope is that this course will help you reclaim some of that time, so that you can infuse it into a better family life, a more holistic family life. And I think you'll find, as many parents in my community have, that making that time makes life so much more enjoyable, both for the child and for the parent, because it gives a child a foundation of independence where they're not as needy, right? There's something about being around a baby who's happy that you're around, but and happy to engage with you, but is also independent enough to explore by themselves for an hour. you know, that actually frees you up to do other things, without having to be on your child, and without having to be super distant because I'm working, that kind of a thing. So I think the taking this course will help one reclaim that time, figure out what elements really are about not having the time, and which are really more about just needing to be prepared with some information prior.
Yeah, beautiful. So to give people an idea of the practical side of things as well, I wanted to just let you all know that if you do take the 6-week training, it will be a 2-hour call with Zoe each week. The calls will be on Saturdays or Sundays, and it will be at this time. So there will be recordings so that if you miss the call, if you can't join live, there's also an opportunity to send in your questions so that Zoe would be able to answer them on the calls. And yeah, it would be the 6-week training. You'll get some readings maybe to at times, maybe we'll challenge them so they can actually open up the books and actually read what Dr. Montessori has said herself said, as we actually got to hear her words today, which I think is really beautiful to always come back to. Um, and for those people who are listening to this recording or live on the call today, we'll send the link to you with all the course information. And there's a special code called Gift for You. And if you use that, you'll get $100 off the course. So I'll put that in the email as well so that you can use that coupon code, because who doesn't like a little gift, right?
Yeah.
So is there anything that you wanted to share with us about like what we'll be covering in the course? I mean, you've already introduced the axes of independence.
Yeah. So I guess beyond what we talked about today, the goal is to make it as practical as possible, especially around what we like to call in Montessori the big three, which is toileting, sleep, and eating. Those seem to be the universal problems that most families have and end up seeking support. And so as we, discuss the language movement, etc., we're going to be discussing how the knowledge of these 5 organs and their development directly tie into a child being able to eat independently, sleep independently, and toilet independently. These are all aspects of physical independence that a child must master. And within the Montessori context, we want them mastering it before the age of 2. And so, for those of you who want to wait till 3 to potty train your child, I'm sorry, we're not going to be supporting that.
Mhm.
Be showing you why it's best to do it from before the age before the age of 2 within the Montessori context. We're going to be showing you why you really have to infuse. You go out of your way to talk to your child, even if your child is in another room and goes ah. You need to respond with a minimum of ah, right? So that the child knows that every time I speak, someone is listening and ready to respond. I'm ready to and ready to engage, which makes it so that when you're approaching things like toileting and eating, the language aspect is really important. What are the words we're using? How are we framing the choices? How are we addressing all the 5 organs? What is the emotional context that we're providing, right? All of those things are super important. I will say this, just as maybe a teaser, that the reason most these 3 things come up so often, toileting, eating, and sleeping as independence issues is because we treat them as intellectual acquisitions only, but they're not. They actually have to do with the will. These are choices, and a child actually has to understand that there's certain choices you don't get to make. You don't get to choose not to sleep. Sleep is fundamental. It's one of the laws of your physical development. We have to sleep, right? And so we need to look at the emotional environment that we've created, the physical environment. We need to look at the language that we're using, etc. Is it conveying to the child the right information about their need for sleep, their need to eat, their need to be toileted in a way that they can take responsibility for it in a joyful way, right? And you see it in my classrooms that the children love putting themselves to sleep. They change into their pajamas. They use the toilet, or the potty, and then they run to their beds. And then if they don't know how to put the blanket on themselves, they ask me to do it, and then they just flip right over and they go to sleep. Same with toileting. Those of you who are teachers have probably seen it. That child who pops up after they've peed with joy, like, did it, look, I peed. Those are children who get it, that independence. Like, this is not about choice. This is about you being free to live your life, right? If we don't approach it from that perspective and we treat it as an intellectual, you need to know how to do this. Okay, and I'm going to start at this particular age because that's when these particular intellectual things have happened in your brain. We've missed the point. We've missed the point, right? And so that's what we're going to, that's more of the practical aspects of what we'll be discussing over these 6 weeks.
Zoe, do you have time to answer maybe 3 questions that have come
Sure,
in? Okay, and then
absolutely.
we'll hold the questions here. We'll answer the 3 that are in the chat. And
Okay.
the first one is, and this is like a big question to answer, is there anything different covered in 0 to 3 that's different to 3 to 6?
Oh, by far. Oh my gosh, by far. And so, yes, it sounds like you have some Montessori experience. So, yes, 0 to 6, all of that is an absorbent mind period. But the type of absorbent mind the child has at this period is very different. From 3 to 6, this child is conscious. They are able to think and have a certain level of abstraction, right? And so, because they've developed language, because they've developed the foundations of their emotions, movement, etc., they are moving consciously to absorb. And you can actually see them at home or in the classroom choosing what they want to work on, what they want to concentrate on. And they're doing it consciously, knowing that I'm doing this because this develops me, right? I'm enjoying the feeling of developing myself through washing my hands over and over and over again. I'm enjoying what this is doing for me as I bake bread, as so many things, right? But it's conscious. They're creating themselves consciously. However, the child from 0 to 3 is unconscious because they don't have language. They can't tell us what they're thinking, right? Um, they're unconscious as far as emotions, right? They basically reflect our own emotions back to us, right? Um, they are still coordinating their movements, right? The child from 0 to 1 is acquiring the movements necessary to be able to walk. Even once the child is walking, they toddle along, right? That's why we have the term toddler. And so they're toddling and they're not able to hold things because they don't have the equilibrium necessary. Then they get that equilibrium, and then they've got to start working on their fine motor movement, right? Isolating those fingers, etc. And all of that is what they're building, but they're doing it unconsciously, right? They're not aware that that's what they're doing. Um, and so the activities that we give them are going to be different, and the structure of those activities are going to be different. So within 3 to 6, we do have, what we call the silent presentations, but we do give them the language typically afterwards, right? But with the child from 0 to 3, we're setting up the environment, right? We allow the child to have the experience of a particular activity. And through our observation, we're going to have an idea of what their interest is, why they're choosing this work, because they can't tell us. And then that gives us a clue as to what they're developing. And there are moments where a child will be interested in something, but they're most interested in the language aspect, right? And so they'll just come to you and be like, "What's this?" And you'll say pen. Then they walk away from you. And you kind of not, uh-huh. And then they walk away and they come back with something else. What's that? Sticky notes? What's this? Book. Okay, that gives us a clue that language is the issue. But then you have another child who's taken those very same objects, but is now looking at them and really exploring, right? And then they might take that blue tip and notice something else that's blue in the environment, right? And they walk over to it and they put it next to it. And you can see that what they're looking at more is the color, right? And so observation becomes our biggest tool because they're developing language, right? They're developing the ability to be conscious, right? They're developing their personality, a conscious personality that decides through a thinking process. But the child from 0 to 3 doesn't do it, and definitely not in the same way. And so we adjust everything accordingly, and we fine tune our observations along those lines. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So the
Mhm.
second one is, could you say more about the Montessori context on sleep and view on co-sleep specifically?
So uh, there's there's no Montessori way to sleep. Okay, there's no Montessori way to potty train, right? There's no Montessori way to eat. There's a Montessori approach. There's a pedagogy, right? And for 0 to 3, we're going to take into account the development of these 5 mental organs, right? And so, what we're really looking at, whether you co sleep or the slight child sleeps individually, neither of those are of consequence, right? What's of consequence is the child able to sleep independently, and that doesn't matter if someone is there. You can be very dependent in your sleep and have your own room and your own crib, right? I'm sure many of you have experienced that. I have to hold my baby for 45 minutes and then, gently lay him into the crib and tiptoe out of his room. And then we turn around and say that that's a child who's sleeping independently. No, that child is not able to sleep independently. But then you'll have another child who co-sleeps next to his parents, but is able to fall asleep by himself, wakes up when he wants to, gets out of bed, jumps on mom and dad when he's awake to let them know he wants to play with them. And that child is actually more independent in their sleep than the one who's in a crib or even on a floor bed, right? And so the context we're really looking at is when it comes to sleep, when it comes to eating, when it comes to toileting, are these five organs that this unconscious child is developing, right? And so, what is the language around sleep? There are families that never mention sleep. They don't talk about sleep, right? I know I've gone to their homes, and so they'll talk around it. Oh, no, you're looking tired, but they won't say you look tired. And when we're tired, you need to sleep. Come with me. I'm going to take you and put you in your bed so you can sleep. Well, that's important so that the child can tie what they're feeling to their need for sleep. So we're looking at the language aspect, right? We're looking at the will. We have to understand that sleep, although it's a necessity, there is an element of will involved. There is a choice. Children have to feel comfortable choosing to sleep. And remember, sleep is our most vulnerable state. Um, um, one of the definitions of home that I love was given by by a professor at the University of Glasgow. He says that home is where you entrust your sleep, right? You don't just trust your sleep to anybody, right? And so we've got to look at the will that's involved, the trust that's involved. Does this child trust his sleep to my presence? It's the first thing I have to challenge myself with when a child enters my school. I can't just assume that this child is going to sleep because they're tired. No, I have to make sure the child trusts me first. And so I tell the parents, it's going to take a few days. Sleep is going to be messed up for the first few weeks while your child adapts to being at my school. Why? Because they need to learn to trust this environment. They need to know what the routines are. They need to have an understanding of all those things. And then from there, choose to allow themselves to enter into a sleep state, right? What takes even longer is being able to wake up from that sleep state and not be alarmed that it's not like home, right? So it's a lot more involved than what I can go into here, but hopefully that gives you a few hints in that direction. That we're really looking at it from developmentally, right, rather than just situationally, whether you co-sleep or whether you sleep by yourself in a bed. Like I said, you can be very dependent or independent in either of those situations.
Beautiful. And then the last one is, can the five organs help us to understand how to work with a child when they are undergoing physical challenges like teething, especially being sick, etc., which often makes children more needy of their primary caregiver?
Huh, that's an interesting question. I guess I haven't thought of it from that perspective. Um, I think you've stumped me. I'm gonna have to think about that because, in one sense, yes, at any moment, the child from 0 to 2.5 is developing these five organs, and those organs have to work together. It does help us to know that when a child is sick, something is being interrupted, at least physically, and that may lead to some emotional changes as well. But I think I'll need some time to refine my answer in the most Montessori sense possible. But yes, foundationally, understanding the five organs gives us the real key to understanding the child in all his states, whether in full health, whether in poor health, whether awake, whether asleep, whether hungry, whether sad, whether active, whether inactive, but specifically when they're sick or going through a challenge like teething, I'll need some more time to think through that.
And it does remind me of like the self-regulation work of Stuart Shanker
Yeah,
and things. And he talks about the five domains. And if a biological aspect like sleep or sickness and that kind of thing means that the child's regulation is going to be off. So it means that, yes, we just have to be more compassionate, have more time and patience while
exactly,
those systems come back, because everything gets triggered much more easily when you're in a sick
exactly.
state. So I guess it definitely complements, yeah, all
Yeah,
of the things that Montessori has to offer as well.
exactly, exactly.
Oh, Ayesha, see if you could share an answer with us once you've thought about it more. I would appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
We have
For
to think
sure.
about how we
Well, you
can
have
get
to
you the
sign up for the
answer.
course then.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I hope that means I can count on you coming, Aisha.
Well, everyone, I hope that you enjoyed this like little taster session as much as I did. It's been a delight, Zoe, to get to share this space with you. And
Fun.
I'm looking forward to January. We'll be kicking off on the 10th of January, and I will send you all details of where you can sign up for the course. Coming to your inbox very soon. As soon as the recording's ready, it'll land in your inbox. And Zoe, there's so many messages already coming through about how much wisdom you've shared. So I'll share them with you
Thank
when the
you.
call's finished. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Bye.